The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in October of 1883, and Penelope Carson knew, before opening it, that her world was about to collapse. She stood in the cramped parlor of her aunt's Boston townhouse, watching dust motes dance in the thin autumn sunlight, her fingers trembling as she broke the seal. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning crashed over her like a wave. Her father was dead, her stepmother had sold everything to pay his gambling debts, and there was nothing left. Not the house in Philadelphia where she had grown up, not the small inheritance her mother had left her, nothing. She was 23 years old, alone, and within a month would be turned out onto the street when her aunt's patience finally wore thin. Penelope folded the telegram carefully and placed it in her pocket, her mind already racing. Boston in 1883 offered few options for a woman without family or fortune. She could seek work as a governess, though positions were scarce and competition fierce. She could throw herself on the mercy of distant cousins, who had made it clear years ago that they wanted nothing to do with her father's branch of the family. Or she could answer the advertisement she had seen 3 days ago in the newspaper, an advertisement she had read twice and then tried to forget. The newspaper still sat on the side table where she had left it, folded to the page with the personal notices. Her hands shook as she picked it up again, reading the words that had seemed so desperate, so impossible when she first encountered them. Rancher in San Angelo, Texas seeks respectable woman for marriage of convenience. Must be of good character and willing to relocate immediately. Correspondence to Lucas Irving, care of San Angelo Post Office, Texas. The very word conjured images of dust and danger, of lawless towns and rough men. But it also promised escape, a chance to start over, a place where no one knew about her father's disgrace or her family's ruin. Penelope sat at the small writing desk and pulled out a sheet of paper, her pen hovering over the blank surface for a long moment before she began to write. 3 weeks later, she stepped off the stagecoach in San Angelo, Texas, her entire life packed into 2 worn carpetbags. The heat struck her first, oppressive and dry despite the fact that it was late October. The town itself was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along dusty streets, with the Concho River winding through the landscape like a brown ribbon. Cattle pens stood at the edge of town, and she could hear the lowing of livestock mixing with the shouts of men and the creaking of wagon wheels. A man stood near the stage office, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that seemed almost startlingly blue against his weathered face. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he watched her descend from the coach. She knew him immediately, though they had exchanged only 2 letters. Lucas Irving, the rancher who needed a wife. Miss Carson. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a softness that surprised her. Mr. Irving. She smoothed her traveling dress, suddenly aware of how dusty and wrinkled she must look after 3 days on various trains and coaches. He stepped forward and picked up her bags without being asked, his movements efficient and economical. I hope the journey was not too difficult. It was long. She watched him carefully, trying to reconcile the reality of this man with the formal, almost stilted letters they had exchanged. In person, he was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 30 or 31, with the kind of weathered appearance that came from years of outdoor work. His clothes were clean but worn, his hands scarred and calloused. "Thank you for meeting me. I have a wagon just over here. We can talk on the way to the ranch." He gestured toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses, then seemed to hesitate. "There is still time if you have changed your mind. I can arrange for you to stay at the hotel tonight, give you time to think." Penelope looked around at the dusty street, at the curious glances from passers-by, at the vast, empty sky that seemed to stretch forever. She thought of Boston, of her aunt's disapproving face, of the long slide into poverty that awaited her if she returned. "I have not changed my mind." Something flickered in his eyes, relief perhaps, or maybe just acknowledgement. He loaded her bags into the wagon and helped her up onto the seat, his touch careful and brief. Then they were moving through town, the horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust, leaving San Angelo behind as they headed into the open country. "I want to be honest with you," Lucas said after they had traveled in silence for several minutes, "about why I need a wife, about what this arrangement means." Penelope folded her hands in her lap and waited, watching the landscape roll past. The land here was different from anything she had known, all long grass and scattered mesquite trees, with hills rising in the distance under an impossibly wide sky. "My father built the ranch 15 years ago, worked himself nearly to death getting it established. When he died 2 years back, he left it to me with one condition in his will. I have to be married by my 31st birthday, or the land goes to my cousin. My father did not trust me to settle down, I suppose. Thought I needed someone to work for, someone to build a future with." His hands tightened on the reins. "My birthday is in 3 weeks. That is why your letter said immediately." "Yes." He glanced at her, then back at the road. "I will not lie to you, Miss Carson. I need this marriage to keep my land, but I will do my best to be a good husband to you. You will have a home, security, a place that is yours. I am not a rich man, but the ranch does well enough. You will never go hungry, and I will treat you with respect." "What happened to make your father write such a condition into his will?" The question escaped before she could stop it, too personal for people who had just met. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was deciding how much to reveal. "I was not ready to settle down when I was younger. Spent too much time in town, drinking and gambling, chasing after things that did not matter. My father wanted to make sure I did not waste the land he had worked so hard for. He figured a wife would make me responsible." He paused. He was probably right. The honesty in his voice surprised her. She had expected evasion, perhaps even lies. Instead, he was laying out the truth as plainly as if he were describing the weather. "I should be honest with you as well," she said. "I am here because I have nowhere else to go. My father died and left debts. Everything was sold. My aunt made it clear I was no longer welcome. I answered your advertisement because I was desperate. Then we are both here out of necessity." He met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of their circumstances. "That is not the worst foundation for a marriage. At least we know where we stand." The ranch appeared gradually as they traveled, first as a distant cluster of buildings, then resolving into a house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, red and white shapes against the golden grass. The house itself was larger than Penelope had expected, a solid 2-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, who comes 3 times a week," Lucas said as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "She has been keeping things clean and doing some cooking. I also have 3 ranch hands who work full-time and several others who come during roundup. They all live in the bunkhouse." He gestured toward a long, low building set some distance from the main house. "They are good men, respectful. You will not have any trouble with them." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bags onto the porch. The door was unlocked, and he pushed it open, stepping aside to let her enter first. The interior was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and doorways led off to what she assumed were kitchen, bedrooms, and other spaces. "I know this is not what you are used to," Lucas said, setting her bags down near the staircase. "It is rough compared to life back east." "It is more than I expected." Penelope turned in a slow circle, taking in the details. The house had an empty feeling, as though it was waiting for someone to bring it to life. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorations on the walls, none of the small touches that made a house a home. "When did you say your birthday was?" "November 15th. 3 weeks from yesterday. Then we should be married as soon as possible, to ensure everything is legal and proper before the deadline." Lucas pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "The circuit judge will be in San Angelo next week. We could arrange it for then if you are certain." "I am certain." She met his eyes steadily. "We have made an agreement, Mr. Irving. I intend to keep my part of it." "Lucas," he said, "if we are to be married, you should call me Lucas." "Lucas." She tested the name, feeling its unfamiliarity on her tongue. "And you should call me Penelope." He nodded, something easing in his shoulders. "Let me show you the rest of the house." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Lucas went into town to arrange for the judge and to purchase supplies. Penelope cleaned and organized the house, trying to make it feel less like a bachelor's quarters and more like a home. Mrs. Rodriguez, a round woman with kind eyes and surprisingly good English, showed her where everything was kept and gave her a basic education in managing a ranch household. "Mr. Lucas is a good man," Mrs. Rodriguez said one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen, putting up preserves. "He works very hard, very honest. His father was good man too, but very strict. I think maybe he make Mr. Lucas feel he was never good enough." Penelope stirred the pot of simmering fruit, watching the steam rise. "Do you think that is why he waited so long to marry? Maybe. Or maybe he just not find right woman before." Mrs. Rodriguez gave her a shrewd look. "You nervous about wedding?" "A little." It was an understatement. Every time Penelope thought about what she was about to do, marrying a man she barely knew and moving permanently to this wild, unfamiliar place, her stomach clenched with anxiety. "That is natural. But I think you be fine. I think maybe you be good for each other." Mrs. Rodriguez patted her arm. "You both need someone. Better to need each other than to be alone." The wedding took place on a Thursday morning in early November in the parlor of the San Angelo courthouse. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, with the judge reading through the legal requirements in a flat voice, while 2 court clerks served as witnesses. Penelope wore her best dress, a dark blue silk that had seen better days, and carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Lucas had awkwardly presented to her that morning, when the judge asked if she took Lucas Irving to be her lawfully wedded husband. She answered clearly and without hesitation. "I do." Lucas's response was equally steady, his blue eyes serious as he looked at her. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hands were gentle, and for a moment she felt a flutter of something in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite hope. They were married. She was Penelope Irving now, wife to a rancher, mistress of a house in the wild Texas country. It did not feel real, even as Lucas signed the marriage certificate and shook hands with the judge. "Congratulations," the judge said, his expression softening slightly. "I hope you will be very happy together." They ate lunch at the hotel dining room, a strange, formal meal where neither of them seemed to know quite what to say. Other diners glanced at them curiously, noting Penelope's Eastern dress and Lucas's obvious discomfort. Finally, as they were finishing their coffee, Lucas cleared his throat. "I want you to know I do not expect anything tonight, or any night until you are ready. We can take this slowly." His face was slightly flushed, but he held her gaze. "I know this is all very sudden and strange for you." Relief washed through her, mixed with something else she could not quite name. "Thank you. That is very considerate. We are partners now," he said. "In this together. I want you to feel safe here, to feel like this is your home." They drove back to the ranch in the afternoon sunlight, and Penelope found herself looking at the landscape with different eyes. This was her home now, this wide, open country. These were her horizons. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a routine. Lucas was up before dawn each day, working with his hands to repair fences, check on cattle, and handle the 1,000 tasks that came with running a ranch. Penelope managed the house, learning to cook on the wood stove, to preserve food, to make soap and candles. In the evenings, they ate dinner together and talked, carefully at first, then with growing ease. She learned that Lucas loved the land with a fierce, quiet passion, that he could read weather in the color of the sky and knew every acre of his property, that he had fought in the last years of the Indian conflicts and carried scars both visible and invisible from that time, that he read books when he had time, mostly histories and agricultural journals, and that he had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed. He learned that Penelope had been educated at a girls' academy before her father's fortunes declined, that she loved music but had not touched a piano in years, that she was quick with numbers and had already reorganized his account books into a more logical system, that she was stubborn and proud and desperately homesick for a place she could never return to. The day before Lucas's birthday arrived with cold, clear weather. He rode out early to check on the herd in the northern pasture, leaving Penelope alone at the house with Mrs. Rodriguez. They spent the morning baking, preparing a special dinner to celebrate both Lucas's birthday and the fact that the ranch was now securely his. "You look happy," Mrs. Rodriguez observed as Penelope carefully iced a cake. Penelope paused, surprised by the observation. Was she happy? She was still adjusting, still sometimes woke in the night disoriented and frightened, but there were moments, increasingly frequent moments, when she felt something close to contentment. "I think I am finding my place here. And with Mr. Lucas." Heat rose in Penelope's cheeks. "We are friends." "It is a good foundation. Friends is good start." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. "But I see how he looks at you when he thinks you not watching, and how you look at him too." Before Penelope could respond, the sound of horses approaching drew their attention. Through the window, she saw Lucas riding in with his 3 ranch hands, all of them moving at a fast trot. Something in their posture, in the urgency of their movement, made her stomach clench. She met Lucas at the door, wiping flour from her hands. "What is wrong?" "Riders on the northern boundary," he said, his face grim. "At least a dozen of them, driving off some of our cattle. I need to go stop them before they get too far." "Is it dangerous?" "It could be. Cattle rustlers are not known for being reasonable." He paused, looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I wanted you to know where I was going in case. The rifle is in the cabinet in my study. Do you know how to use one?" "My father taught me when I was young." "Good. I do not think anyone will come to the house, but it is better to be prepared." He reached out and for the first time since their wedding touched her face, his palm rough and warm against her cheek. "I will be back as soon as I can. Please be careful." The words came out more intensely than she had intended, revealing something she had not fully acknowledged even to herself. His expression softened. "I will. I have something to come back for now." Then he was gone, riding north with his men, leaving Penelope standing on the porch with her heart pounding and Mrs. Rodriguez beside her making the sign of the cross. The hours that followed were among the longest of Penelope's life. She tried to keep busy, finishing the dinner preparations, cleaning the kitchen, but her ears were constantly straining for the sound of returning horses. Mrs. Rodriguez stayed with her, both of them speaking little, the tension thick in the air. Darkness fell. Still no sign of Lucas or the ranch hands. Penelope lit lamps and placed them in the windows, tried to read, paced the floor. Every sound outside made her jump, her imagination conjuring terrible scenarios. Lucas shot, lying wounded somewhere in the darkness. Lucas taken by the rustlers. Lucas never coming back, leaving her alone in this strange place where she was still learning to belong. She realized, with startling clarity, that she cared what happened to him. Not just because he was her husband in the legal sense, not just because she depended on him for shelter and security, but because in the past 3 weeks he had become important to her. His quiet kindness, his steady presence, the way he asked her opinion about ranch matters and actually listened to her answers. The way his face lit up when he smiled, which was rare but wonderful. She cared about him, and the thought of him hurt or dead made something twist painfully in her chest. It was past midnight when she finally heard horses. She ran to the door, rifle in hand, even as she recognized the familiar silhouettes. Lucas rode at the front, still upright, apparently unhurt. Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees went weak. He dismounted and walked toward the house, moving stiffly. In the lamplight she could see blood on his sleeve and a dark bruise forming along his jaw. "We got the cattle back," he said, "and the rustlers scattered. I do not think they will be back. You are hurt." She set the rifle aside and reached for him, her hands hovering uncertainly, just a graze. One of them got off a shot before they ran. He looked at her face and seemed to see something there that made his expression change. "Were you worried?" "Of course I was worried." Her voice came out sharper than she intended, fueled by hours of anxiety. "You could have been killed. I am sorry. I did not mean to frighten you." He stepped closer, and they stood there on the porch, the space between them charged with something new and electric. "Penelope, She did not let him finish. Instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him, her hands fisting in his shirt, all the fear and relief of the past hours pouring into that contact. For a moment, he stood frozen, surprised. Then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back, deeply and thoroughly, in a way that made her forget everything except the solid warmth of him, alive and safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were wide with wonder. "I did not think you wanted that." "Neither did I," she admitted. "But somewhere in the past 3 weeks things changed. You changed them. I was so afraid tonight, Lucas, afraid I would lose you before I even really had you. You have me." His voice was rough, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "I think I have been yours since you stepped off that stagecoach, looking so brave and so scared at the same time. I was just waiting for you to be ready." They made love that night, slowly and carefully, learning each other in the lamplight. It was awkward at first, both of them nervous, but also sweet and increasingly passionate. Afterward, lying tangled together in Lucas's bed, Penelope felt more at home than she had since arriving in Texas. Perhaps more at home than she had felt anywhere in a long time. "Happy birthday," she whispered against his chest. She felt his laugh rumble through him. "Best birthday of my life, and the ranch is officially mine. Ours." "Ours," she repeated, liking the sound of that word. Winter came to the Texas plains, bringing cold nights and occasional dustings of snow. Penelope grew more confident in her role as ranch wife, managing the household with increasing skill, and even helping Lucas with some of the ranch bookkeeping. She discovered she had a talent for numbers and organization, and under her management, the ranch's finances became clearer and more efficient. The ranch hands grew comfortable with her, tipping their hats respectfully when they saw her, and coming to the house for medical attention when they were injured, trusting her to bandage wounds and dispense remedies. She learned their names and their stories, learned which ones were homesick and which were running from something. Christmas arrived, and Penelope decorated the house with evergreen branches and candles, determined to make it festive, despite being so far from the traditional celebrations she had known. Lucas surprised her by bringing home a small piano from San Angelo, a battered old instrument he had found in a saloon that was closing down. "I know it is not much," he said as his men carried it carefully into the house. "And I know it needs tuning, but I remembered you said you missed playing." Penelope ran her fingers over the scarred wood, tears pricking her eyes. "It is perfect, thank you." She played that evening, her fingers stumbling at first after so long away from the keys, then gradually finding their rhythm. Lucas sat near the fire, listening with his eyes closed, and when she finished, he crossed to her and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. "I love you," he said, the words simple and honest. "I know this started as an arrangement, but somewhere along the way it became real for me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope Irving. I love you too." The admission came easily, because it was true. She had fallen in love with this quiet, steady man who worked so hard and cared so deeply. "I came here desperate and afraid, and you gave me not just shelter but a home, not just security but a life. You gave me yourself." They celebrated the new year of 1884 with the ranch hands, roasting a steer and making a party of it. The men sang songs in both English and Spanish, and Lucas danced with Penelope under the stars, both of them laughing as they stumbled through steps neither of them quite remembered. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle produced calves, and Lucas hired extra hands for the branding and the work of managing the expanded herd. Penelope planted a garden near the house, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the Texas soil with the help and advice of Mrs. Rodriguez. She corresponded with some of the other ranch wives in the area, forming tentative friendships, finding her place in the community. And in April, she realized she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Lucas, choosing a quiet evening when they were sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "I have news," she said, her hand finding his. "We are going to have a baby." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and something like awe. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby. Truly, truly. Sometime in December, Mrs. Rodriguez thinks. We need to get a doctor out here, make sure you have everything you need, and we should probably fix up one of the bedrooms upstairs as a nursery." He was already planning, his mind racing ahead, and she laughed at his enthusiasm. "We have time. 8 months is a long while." But Lucas was not content to wait. Over the following weeks, he threw himself into preparations with the same intensity he brought to all his work. He repaired and painted one of the upstairs bedrooms, built a cradle from scratch, and made regular trips to San Angelo to purchase supplies that Penelope insisted they did not need yet. The pregnancy was not easy. The heat of the Texas summer made Penelope uncomfortable and often ill, and there were days when she could barely keep food down. But Lucas was endlessly patient, bringing her water and cool cloths, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, reading aloud to her when she was too tired to do anything else. "I am sorry I am not more help with the ranch work," she said one afternoon in August, frustrated by her own limitations. "You are growing our child," Lucas replied, his hand gentle on her swollen belly. "That is the most important work there is right now. Everything else can wait." In September, Lucas's cousin arrived unannounced, a slick-looking man named Richard, who made it clear from the first moment that he was not happy about losing the ranch. He stayed for 3 uncomfortable days, making snide comments about the marriage and suggesting that perhaps the union was not as legitimate as it appeared. "Seems convenient, you finding a wife right when you needed one," Richard said over dinner on his second evening there. "Makes a man wonder if the whole thing was not just a show to satisfy the will." Lucas's jaw tightened, but Penelope spoke before he could respond. "Our marriage is quite real, I assure you, as real as the child I am carrying." She met Richard's eyes steadily. "This ranch belongs to my husband, legally and rightfully. Whatever disappointment you might feel about that is your concern, not ours." Richard left the next morning, and Lucas pulled Penelope into his arms as they watched him ride away. "Thank you for defending us. And I am sorry you had to deal with that. He is family. He will always be part of your life in some way. Maybe, but you and this baby, you are my real family now, the only family that matters." He kissed her forehead. "I would choose you over the ranch, you know. If I had to make that choice, I would choose you every time." The words warmed her more than he probably knew. "Fortunately, you do not have to choose. You have both." December arrived with unseasonable warmth, and Penelope's time came on a bright, clear morning 2 weeks before Christmas. The labor was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Rodriguez and the doctor from San Angelo, with Lucas pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. For a while, Penelope thought she might die, the pain so intense that she could not imagine surviving it. But Mrs. Rodriguez held her hand and murmured encouragement in Spanish, and the doctor guided her through each contraction. And finally, as the winter sun was setting, she heard the sharp, angry cry of a newborn. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the tiny, red, squalling infant in her arms. "A healthy boy." Lucas was allowed in then, and the look on his face when he saw his son made all the pain worth it. He knelt beside the bed, one finger gently stroking the baby's downy head, his eyes bright with tears he did not bother to hide. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Penelope. Thank you for this gift." They named him Thomas after Penelope's father, despite everything. "He made mistakes," Penelope said as they sat together in the nursery a few days later, watching their son sleep. "But he loved me in his way. I would like to remember the good parts." "Thomas Irving," Lucas said, testing the name. "I like it, and I promise you, Penny, I will do better by him than my father did by me. He will know he is loved every day of his life." The first years of Thomas's life were busy and full. The ranch continued to prosper, and Lucas was able to hire more permanent hands, expanding their operations. Penelope found she enjoyed the challenges of ranch life more than she ever would have expected, and she and Lucas worked together as true partners, each respecting and valuing what the other brought to their shared enterprise. Thomas grew from a colicky infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, equally at home being carried around the ranch by Lucas or helping Penelope in her garden. He was followed in the fall of 1886 by a daughter, Mary, and then in 1888 by another son, James. The house that had once felt so empty was now full of noise and life. Children's laughter rang from the rooms, and muddy boots cluttered the entryway, and toys littered every surface. It was messy and chaotic, and nothing like the orderly life Penelope had once known in Boston, and she would not have traded it for anything in the world. In the spring of 1889, a letter arrived from Boston. Penelope's aunt had died and, surprisingly, had left Penelope a small legacy. Not enough to change their lives in any significant way, but enough to be meaningful. A gesture of reconciliation from beyond the grave, perhaps, or simply the settling of an old woman's conscience. What do you want to do with it? Lucas asked as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the children play in the yard under the watchful eye of Mrs. Rodriguez. Penelope was quiet for a moment, thinking about the frightened young woman who had arrived in San Angelo 5.5 years ago, desperate and alone. She thought about everything that had happened since, all the ways she had grown and changed, all the love she had found in this unexpected place. "I want to use it to improve the ranch," she said. "Maybe build a better bunkhouse for the hands or invest in better breeding stock. This is our home, our future. I want to put it into something that will last." Lucas smiled and took her hand, their fingers intertwining in the way that had become second nature. "I fall more in love with you every day. Do you know that? I hope so, because I feel the same about you." She leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun set over the land that had become hers in every way that mattered. "I came here because I had no choice, because I was desperate. But staying, building this life with you, that has been entirely my choice. The best choice I ever made." The years continued to pass in the way they do on a working ranch, measured in seasons and cattle drives, in children's birthdays and harsh winters and abundant springs. Thomas grew tall and serious, fascinated by the workings of the ranch and eager to help his father with anything and everything. Mary was spirited and stubborn, constantly getting into mischief, keeping her mother on her toes. James was the gentle one, more interested in books than cattle, already showing signs that he might want a different life than the ranch offered. In 1892, tragedy struck when a late spring storm brought flooding that killed several head of cattle and destroyed one of the barns. But the family weathered it together, Lucas and his hands working to rebuild, while Penelope managed the books and found ways to stretch their resources. The community rallied around them too, neighbors helping with the reconstruction, reminding them that they were not alone. "This is what I love about this place," Penelope said one evening, exhausted but grateful. "People take care of each other here. They show up when you need them." "You are part of that community now," Lucas said. "Not an outsider anymore, but one of us. These people care about you, respect you. You have earned your place here." It was true. Penelope had become known throughout the region as a skilled manager and a woman of good sense. Other ranch wives sought her advice, and she had organized a women's cooperative for sharing resources and knowledge. She wrote regular columns for the San Angelo newspaper about ranch life and domestic matters, her words reaching far beyond their immediate community. The 20th century approached, bringing with it new technologies and new challenges. The railroad expanded closer to San Angelo, making it easier to ship cattle to market, but also bringing more people and more change. The wild, open character of the frontier began to shift toward something more settled and civilized. In 1899, Lucas and Penelope celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. The children were growing older now, Thomas nearly 15 and already as tall as his father, Mary 13, and showing the first signs of the beauty she would become, James 11, and always with his nose in a book. They sat around the dinner table, a family, sharing stories and laughter, and Penelope marveled at how much her life had changed. After the children went to bed, she and Lucas walked out to the porch as they so often did, looking at the stars scattered across the vast Texas sky. He put his arm around her and she leaned into his familiar warmth. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming here, marrying a stranger, giving up the life you knew?" "Never." She spoke without hesitation because it was the absolute truth. "You gave me everything that matters, Lucas. A home, a family, a purpose. Love. Real, lasting love. I was running away when I came here, but what I found was so much more than just shelter. I found where I was meant to be. I was so afraid that first day, he admitted. Afraid you would take one look at the ranch and run. Afraid you would never be happy here, would always be longing for something else. Afraid I would never be enough for someone like you. She turned to face him, her hands framing his weathered face, still handsome to her after all these years. You have always been enough, more than enough. You have been everything. They kissed under the stars, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. The ranch spread around them, the land they had worked and built together, the legacy they would pass to their children. Cattle lowed in the distance, and a coyote called to the moon, and the wind whispered through the grass like a song. The next decade brought more changes. Thomas took on increasing responsibility for the ranch, proving himself to be a natural leader and a skilled cattleman. Mary fell in love with the son of a neighboring rancher, and married at 18, her wedding a joyful celebration that brought together the entire community. James, as expected, chose a different path, accepting a scholarship to study literature at a university back east, though he promised to return for visits. Lucas and Penelope grew older together, their hair graying, their steps perhaps a bit slower, but their love as strong as ever. They became grandparents when Mary had her first child, a daughter who looked remarkably like Penelope had at that age. Thomas married a sensible young woman from town and brought her to live at the ranch, another generation taking root in the land. In the evenings, Lucas and Penelope still sat on their porch, watching the sunset, talking about their day, comfortable in the silence when words were not needed. Sometimes Penelope played the piano, the old instrument somehow still holding its tune after all these years, and Lucas would stand beside her, his hand on her shoulder, listening to the music that had first brought beauty into his bachelor house. "I have been thinking," Lucas said one evening in the summer of 1911, when they had been married for 28 years, "about building a new house closer to town, something smaller, and giving this place to Thomas and his family. They need the space now with 3 children. And we do not need so much room anymore." Penelope considered this, looking at the house that had been her home for so long. It was filled with memories, every room echoing with the sounds of the life they had built. But Lucas was right. It was time to pass it on, to let the next generation make their own memories here. "I think that is a good idea," she said. "As long as we have a porch, I have gotten very used to sitting on the porch with you. The biggest porch you have ever seen," he promised, smiling. A porch for 2 old people to sit and watch the world go by. They built the new house that winter, a comfortable cottage on the outskirts of San Angelo, with the promised porch and a view of the hills. The move was bittersweet, saying goodbye to the ranch house even as they handed it over to Thomas and his growing family. But it was also freeing, a release from the daily responsibilities that had defined their lives for so long. Retirement suited them. Lucas still consulted on ranch matters, and Penelope still managed the books, but they had time now for other things. They traveled a little, visiting James in the east, and seeing parts of the country they had never had time to explore. They read together, discussed politics and literature, gardened in their small yard, and enjoyed the slower pace of life. But mostly, they simply enjoyed each other. After nearly 3 decades together, they were still best friends as well as lovers, still able to make each other laugh, still finding new things to talk about. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership that had weathered all the challenges life could throw at it and emerged stronger. In 1915, the world was changing in ways they could never have imagined when they first met. The Great War raged in Europe. Automobiles were becoming common even in rural Texas, and electricity was slowly making its way to even small towns like San Angelo. The wild frontier they had known was fading into history, becoming stories people told their grandchildren. "We lived through interesting times," Penelope said one evening, sitting on their porch with Lucas beside her, their hands clasped as they so often were. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted from inside, where the family had gathered for Sunday dinner. "We did," Lucas agreed. "And we built something good, you and I, something that will last." She looked at him, at the lines on his face that told the story of their years together, at the blue eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. "I love you, Lucas Irving. I have loved you for most of my life now, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Penelope Irving. You were the answer to a need, but you became the answer to everything. My partner, my love, my home." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "Marrying you was the best thing I ever did." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. Penelope thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in 1883, desperate and alone, and wished she could tell her that everything would be all right, better than all right. That she would find not just shelter but love, not just security but joy, not just a house but a home. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the normal rhythms of life. More grandchildren arrived and then great-grandchildren, the family tree spreading and growing. Lucas and Penelope remained the heart of it all, the matriarch and patriarch whose love story had started it all. Their cottage became a gathering place, somewhere family came to visit, to seek advice, to share news. They celebrated their golden anniversary in 1933, 50 years of marriage, with a party that brought together generations. Thomas stood to give a toast, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about the parents who had built something lasting, who had shown him and his siblings what true partnership looked like. "My father needed a wife to keep his land," Thomas said, raising his glass. "My mother needed shelter." But what they found was so much more. They found each other, and in doing so, they built a family, a legacy, a love that has sustained all of us. "To my parents, who taught us what really matters." Penelope wiped tears from her eyes as everyone cheered and drank the toast. Lucas squeezed her hand, and she knew he was thinking the same thing she was, remembering that awkward first meeting, the uncertain early days, the moment when everything had changed from necessity to choice, from arrangement to love. They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by their grandchildren, Lucas's arms around her just as sure as they had been 50 years before. "Still the best decision I ever made," he whispered in her ear. "Still the best journey I ever took," she replied. The 1930s brought the Depression, hard times even in rural Texas. But the family weathered it together, pooling resources, helping each other through. The ranch continued to operate, though on a smaller scale, and Penelope's careful management of resources, skills learned in those early days, helped them survive when others failed. Lucas's health began to decline in his early 80s, the years of hard work taking their toll. But he remained sharp and engaged, still interested in everything happening on the ranch, still sitting on the porch with Penelope every evening when the weather allowed. They talked about the past, about the future, about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would carry on after they were gone. "You think they understand?" Lucas asked one evening in the late spring of 1938. "How precious this all is, what it took to build it." "I think so," Penelope said. "And if they forget, the land will teach them, just as it taught us." Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep in June of 1938, surrounded by family, his hand in Penelope's. He was 86 years old and had lived a long, full life. The funeral brought together people from across the region, a testament to the respect he had earned and the impact he had made. Penelope grieved deeply, missing her partner of 55 years with an ache that never fully healed. But she also felt grateful for every moment they had shared, every year of their unexpected love story. She continued to live in the cottage, surrounded by family, active and engaged until the very end. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1941, at the age of 81, dreaming perhaps of a young man with blue eyes who had met her at a stagecoach station so many years before and changed her life forever. She was buried beside Lucas in the cemetery, overlooking the ranch they had built together, their headstones side by side, just as they had lived. The ranch continued, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy that Lucas and Penelope had begun. The story of how it all started, how a rancher who needed a wife to keep his land had found a woman who needed shelter, and how they had found love instead, became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. In the cottage that had been their final home, now preserved as a family gathering place, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren would sit on the porch and look out at the Texas landscape, still beautiful, still wild in its way, and remember the two people who had shown them what was possible when necessity became choice and arrangement became love. The piano Penelope had played for so many years still stood in the corner of the living room, old and battered but still somehow in tune. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, one of the great-grandchildren would play it, and the music would drift out into the Texas night, a reminder of all that had been built here, all the love that had grown from such uncertain beginnings. And if you listened closely, on those nights when the wind was right, you might almost hear the echo of laughter from long ago, of two people who had taken a chance on each other when they had no other choice, and had found in that chance everything they had ever wanted. Their love story had started with need and desperation, but it had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to what could be built when two people chose each other, day after day, year after year, through all the challenges and joys that life brought. The land endured, as it always had and always would. The cattle grazed on the same grass that had fed herds generations before. The Concho River still wound through the landscape like a ribbon of life. The sky still stretched vast and endless overhead, holding all the stories of all the people who had lived and loved beneath it. And somewhere in that endless sky, perhaps, Lucas and Penelope Irving were still together, still sitting on a porch watching the sunset, still holding hands as they had for 55 years, still grateful for the day a rancher needed a wife to keep his land and a woman needed shelter, and they found love instead. Their story had ended, but its echoes would continue forever, woven into the fabric of the family they had created and the land they had loved, a legacy of love that had started with necessity and grown into something eternal.